Good morning. This is the lesson on challenges to fundamental principles. Here's the essential question that we're looking at today. How do our nation's fundamental principles affect debates about current issues? Think about what you already know. All right, so here's a question. The United States began as an experiment to see if certain ideas about government would work. Do you think the fundamental ideas about our government have changed? This is not a right or wrong question, so it's just your opinion. Here's how we prepare for the lesson. And here's the learning objectives. Explain the importance of fundamental principles. Compare positions on issues related to the fundamental principles and values of government and individual rights in American society. Define key terms: fundamental, principle, surveillance, and transparency. What is more important, the rights of the individual or the rights of society? This is also not a right or wrong question. I would argue from my own perspective it depends on the circumstances. But it's something to think about. What is more important, preserving individual privacy rights or tracking criminal terrorist suspects? And this has been something in the news recently because we had the Capitol stormed by criminals recently. So where do their rights to privacy end and where do our rights begin as far as taking them down as criminal terrorist suspects? Would it be right to surveil them ahead of time to figure out what they're going to do, or would that be an infringement on their rights? Again, that's a question for you to ponder yourself. What is more important, the government's ability to help people or the principle of limited government? Here we get into the principle of limited government, and yet at the same time we have systems in place which help pay for those who cannot work, and in some cases those who will not work. Is that limited government, or is that taking care of people part of limited government? Think about why principles are important. Here's some fundamental principles. You'll see these later, by the way. Consent of the governed, representative government, limited government, individual freedom, and rule of law. Here's some fundamental values that are found, part of the foundations for principles. So look at the example they have over there on the right. In 2012, New York City attempted to ban the sale of supersized sugary drinks for health reasons. So would there be a conflict between principles and personal values? Maybe that would be, from their point of view, New York's point of view, the common good. But it conflicts with individual rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Fundamental principles are a reminder of our government's role and purpose. If we don't have fundamental principles, then is our government doing its job? Or if our fundamental principles are challenged? Does it prevent changes in laws on society changes? When was this Constitution written? When was the Bill of Rights written? More than 200 years ago. Which part of these should apply now? Which part of these should not? And that's where we get into the Constitution being viewed as a living document. A lot of people who look at the Constitution believe it is something that should be changed over time to reflect the norms of society as we now see. Individual rights versus the rights of society is a very common conflict. Look at the example down here. I'm going to tell you that before 11 September 2001, when you went to an airport, it was actually very quick to get through the screening process that they had in place and to go sit down and enjoy yourself waiting for an airplane. Nothing like it was shortly after 9/11, and even today, when the TSA exists, which did not then, as an attempt by the federal government to normalize the screening process. Typically, when individual rights decrease, the rights of society increase. And so we have to find a balancing act, and that's not an easy thing to do. By the time you see this, you should have already read the lesson that I left in Canvas. If not, make sure you read the lesson when we're done with this. Fundamental principles. Yeah, A, B, C, and D. These actually will have a right or wrong answer, so we're going to hit start. And then I'm going to hit stop. So the correct answers remind us of our government's role and purpose. Typically, when the rights of individuals increase, the rights of society, and we just talked about this, didn't we? They decrease. Individual rights associated with police interactions include which of the following? Take a look at A, B, C, and D. And let's see what the correct answer is. The right to remain silent, to refuse a warrantless home or vehicle search, and to obtain an attorney. Also known sometimes as the Miranda rights. Think about individual rights and the information we've learned from our reading. See what the balloons here are saying. What are people saying? Should our society acknowledge all religious holidays by allowing students and employees to stay home on those days? Should the law force you to marry people who don't have your same religious beliefs? Here's a question. If you have a city clerk who happens to be a Christian, can they cite their own rights in order to refuse to marry, say, atheist and a Christian or a homosexual couple? The answer is no. They don't have the ability to do that, because then they would be infringing on the rights of others. How would you balance the right of citizens to own weapons with public safety rights? How do the rights of individuals hamper police in their efforts? Do you think individuals have enough rights in our nation, or too many rights? That's a question constantly being asked by our politicians at local, state, and federal level. How do you think our values, patriotism, truth, and diversity, equality of opportunity, justice, and the common good balance with the rights of the individual? Under what circumstances might there be conflicts? Think about fundamental principles related to our government. Again, we should have already read the text. If not, once this is over, make sure you do. Consent of the government is primarily about what? That's democracy. True or false, conflicting ideas about limited government raise questions about the size of government and ability to do its job. Absolutely true. We see that play on the national stage in the recent election, and likely and almost certainly every election to come. Think about a fundamental principle question that is very important to you. What's important to you often won't be important to others. That's okay. We have different values. We have different personal principles. Were we here, we would participate in a group discussion. How can you make the strongest argument for your position? Facts, anecdotes, emotional appeals, historical records. Now, emotional appeal is often considered a logical fallacy. However, when discussing politics, it is used quite regularly. If you look at political debates, they're very replete with emotional appeals. What's the most important thing to communicate when you're trying to persuade someone about your point of view? Think about persuading others on an issue of fundamental principles. And then normally we'd also have the task at the end. In this case, your performance assessment task will be in the form of a quiz. that I've placed into Canvas. That concludes this presentation. Thank you and have a pleasant day.